Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk to you about a passionate subject for me. Divine masculine and divine feminine. This subject provokes so much confusion. Now we understand that we're in the age of Aquarius, and most of us who are part of the spiritual community think that part of the age of Aquarius is femininity or divine feminine, raising up into its power so there's balance that is restored within this universe, or within the human race more specifically. There is an idea that in order for the human race to come into an aspect of balance relative to masculine and feminine, that masculinity has to come down in its level of power, and that femininity has to rise up in its level of power, and then you will have balance. But I'm here to tell you today that this is not the truth at all. We are not sitting on some kind of cosmic scale. And I can tell you firsthand that rising to power for women has nothing to do with decreasing in power for men. Another way of saying this is that the balance that will be restored within humanity and on this planet Earth relative to masculine and feminine is about both rising into power. Now I know what you're thinking. Wait a second. Masculinity has been in control and in power for thousands of years. What if I told you that isn't true? What if I told you that masculinity, divine masculine, has not actually ever reached its point of power? What if I told you that divine masculine has been acting from a place of powerlessness for years upon years? Men have stripped power from women for thousands of years. There is a big difference between gaining power yourself and stripping power away from another. When you strip power from someone else by brute force, by subjugation, you do not increase your power one bit. You stay where you are vibrationally while you diminish the power of another. This is the only reason that it seems as if one has more power than the other. But you are not powerful because someone else is weak. Women have made a major mistake, and that mistake is to want to do the same thing to men that men have done to us for centuries. To take our power back by demasculinizing them. And this, of course, is coming from an understandable place. We have spent most of our lives feeling completely powerless to men. The truth is, we felt powerless for so many years that the natural step from that powerless space is into anger and revenge. And so our culture in the West has stripped masculinity out of men. And while many patriarchal misogynists still do exist, many men, especially those who watch videos like this one, are afraid to come into their power because they are sorry for what men have done to women in the past. They're afraid of becoming monsters. They associate their masculine power as negative instead of positive. As you know, I like putting myself on the line in this video, so I'm going to open up to you now. Most of you who have been following my story and my videos know that my childhood was extreme. I was subjugated by men, prostituted by men. I was used for their amusement since I was 6 years old. And yet, I grew up a beautiful woman. And so I did not feel the same kind of powerlessness relative to them that many women feel, because I felt as if I could manipulate my way into anything relative to men. I could get them to do what I wanted them to do. But recently, I came in touch with my own femininity, you could call it. I basically started exploring what it was that I was disconnected with relative to my own womanhood. And what I found is this. There is a bunch of levels that I had not really examined relative to me disconnecting with my own femininity. Me feeling as if men basically have stripped my connection with my feminine power away. And regardless of whether it took the shape of a man actually controlling me, which it didn't, it took another shape. I found, which was that I came into contact with the fact that I have so much shame relative to being a woman. And I did identify that origin, of course, the origin of those beliefs as coming from men in my childhood. And so even though I may not have felt as if I was being directly subjugated by them, I was being indirectly subjugated by men. And I went into a real spiral about this because I realized that I had shame relative to everything that my body was doing, and I had this belief, basically, that it was better to be born a man, which is actually a belief which most women that I have talked to share. I got mad. For the first time in my life, I really related to the women in the 60s movements, where I just felt as if I have lost my connection with being a woman. There was something inherent in my nature that was not okay, and should not be embraced, and should be ashamed of. So I experienced this interesting thing relative to my ex-husband, where he was meaning well, of course, but I came downstairs after all this realization about the fact that I had felt powerless to men for years and years and not been aware of it, because it took such a covert form within me, that I came downstairs and I expressed all of this new epiphany with him about the fact that our society in general makes women feel as if we are not appropriate in and of ourselves, as if we're not good enough as women, as if there's some inherent shame that comes along with being a woman, and that I felt as if I was very disconnected with myself as female, that I felt more masculine, in fact. And I started ranting and raving about what I've observed in this current society, which is that that is a societal issue, not only on this continent, not only in the Western world, but in the world in general. It's a collective human belief, basically, among women, that there is something inappropriate about divine feminine, something shameful about it. Now, meaning well, of course, and understanding my teachings, he came back at me and said, well, yeah, you'd be a match to that, wouldn't you? That's your creation. You won't meet any women in your reality that are in a space of power, because your point of attraction is women that aren't. Now, I have to tell you, in that split second, I experienced what many women have experienced for years and years, and I related to women who have been fighting against men for years and years. I got really, really angry in that minute. I almost bit his head off because I felt as if I was coming from a space of powerlessness. I didn't realize how powerless I felt to my own divine feminine nature. And I was coming from that space of powerlessness into a space of more power, which felt like anger. And in that moment, that invalidation of the powerlessness that I felt for years and years, I got so furious that downstream was revenge. So I must say, the reason I shared that is because it is understandable why so many people watching this video would feel a lot of anger relative to men, and a lot of anger even relative to hearing me say that balance in the universe is not going to be restored by femininity rising up and masculinity decreasing, but rather by the rising up of both. I resisted my femininity for years because I grew up in a society, like most of us do, where I was convinced it was better to be born a boy. I was brutalized and prostituted. I felt out of control of my body. I grew up in a culture that believed that there were just certain things that came along with being a girl that were our cross to bear. I didn't want to be a girl. I hardened my personality so much that I lost touch with my femininity. I perceived my femininity as weakness. I was repulsed by the idea of being a woman, and yet every month I bled, and yet I bear children. When I was young, I grew up in a culture which believed in the idea of Adam and Eve. And in the story of Adam and Eve, Eve is the one that picks the apple, and after that is damned basically by God, cursed by God, and is seen as a sinner. She is basically, Eve is the origin of sin, and the reason women bleed each month and the reason that childbirth is painful to this particular culture is because of that original sin. So it's the cross to bear of every woman basically to suffer for that original sin of Eve. And so there is something in the culture I grew up in that is, I should say, sinful, or something that should be repented for, and even being born a girl. So men seemed stronger to me. They could survive the kind of things I was going through, and I felt that I couldn't. And regardless of what I wanted or didn't want, I understood that my body would yield to theirs. I mean, I got my period when I was 15 years old, and the very next cycle I got pregnant by my abuser, which is a man who was in his 60s at the time. and I must admit I felt like my body betrayed me. The odd thing that I found out when I started seeing clients is it didn't take the extremity of the kind of situation I was in as a child to develop these feelings relative to your own femininity. I want you to let this sink in for a minute. I have not met one woman in all of my years of doing this job that I've been doing that does not feel some kind of alienation and separation from their own internal femininity. And we could consider femininity the essence of who they are in this life. That's kind of a problem. We make an enemy of our gender, and yet we can't escape it. And the same goes for men. It's no different. So many men on this planet reject their own masculinity. They have no idea what it is. What is it to be a man? What is it to be a woman? It's the same question in all of our minds. We're in this internal struggle relative to our own gender. We can't figure out what it means. And so there's a sort of power struggle that goes on between men and women, and we spend most of our time trying to strip the other of its power in order to feel as if we have power. But you know what's interesting? We find we're not actually attracted to our polar aspect, whether that be male, whether that be female, if that polar aspect is not in a space of its true power and true potential. So we may try to strip away their power, but is at the detriment of uniting, because we're no longer attracted to one another. Men try to take power away from women and find that they are actually not attracted to ignorant, weak, subjugated lemmings. Women try to take their power back from men and realize that they do not respect and are not attracted to demasculinized, confused, overgrown children. We are not attracted to weakness in each other. We only want weakness from the other sex when we ourselves feel insecure and powerless to them. The truth is, we all enjoy freedom, and free will is a precondition of your life. It's an absolute. We enjoy the freedom of being able to choose to work or to stay home with the kids, regardless of what gender we are. But the secret no one wants to talk about is that we all love gender roles. We just have no idea how to maintain them and not hurt ourselves and other people at the same time. One day our race will have no gender, because all people have both aspects present within themselves. This is why, from an energetic standpoint, gender is inconsequential. But as of now, this polarity serves our expansion. And you cannot resist what you are and where you are and find balance. Most of us, men, are trying to embrace femininity within ourselves because we resist our masculinity. And most of us, women, are trying to embrace masculinity because we resist our femininity. So how do we get out of this cycle? We embrace the very thing that we are resisting. The human race is not ready for individuals to embrace an androgynous nature. Because we are in an aspect of resistance relative to our own gender, we must first learn how to embrace and express the very nature of our polarity, which is masculine, feminine. And I must tell you, this has never been done. So I don't want you to feel as if the human race knew something a long time ago, during the tribal era, or during a more spiritual time in our existence, and we've lost it somehow. We have never experienced within the human race a time where masculine energy and feminine energy both rose to their highest potential and power. When both sexes rise to power, it is impossible for one to be more or less powerful than the other. They will rise in tandem. They will rise in unity. I want you to think of this a bit like the yin-yang symbol, where you have perfect balanced opposites, each which contain some of the other, each which eternally stand in a flow of harmony. Because it is such a preciously held belief within the spiritual community that balance will be restored once femininity rises to power and the tyranny of men fall, I understand that it is difficult to absorb this information and to accept it immediately. But it is time for divine masculine and divine feminine to finally figure out what its own inherent power is. Men need to learn how to become men. Women need to learn how to become women. And we do this by stopping caring what the other person, other gender, is doing or thinking or feeling. I know it sounds like a contradiction, but we've been so damn focused on each other, the way the other is suppressing us, the way the other needs to be treated, that we're forgetting that the answer always is within us. If you need to embrace the true aspect of who you are as a man or as a woman, stop thinking about what the woman thinks and start coming into power yourself. Stop caring about what the man is doing or not doing. Start coming into power yourself. If we just leave the other aspect of ourselves out of the equation and figured out what coming into power for ourselves means, then masculinity and femininity would rise in tandem. Moral of the story. It is time for divine masculine to be unleashed and to rise to its full potential and full power, in the same way that it is time for divine feminine to be unleashed and to rise into its full potential and full power. At this time and this age, we are going to do this together. Because this is such an important subject, this is going to be my subject for the next 2 weeks. Next Saturday, the topic is going to be how to embrace divine feminine. And the week after that, it's going to be how to embrace divine masculine. So join me for those 2 episodes. I'll see you next week.